So it all starts with an old man telling a tale about some cannibalistic demon, a creature with the body resembling that of a man but the head of a slug. A creature that appeared out of nowhere in a small village one night and was said to have attacked and slaughtered an entire family overnight. Now, from all that, it may seem like just another one of those cliché stories where some monster shows up, kills a bunch of people, and is eventually hunted down by some powerful demon hunter. But no, this story is a bit different, because after that horrific incident, the monster disappeared from the village, only to be found 3 days later. But this time, the only thing that remained was its severed head, nailed to the gate of the house belonging to the very family it had slaughtered. No one truly knew what happened or how such a monster met its end, but rumors have it that it was the doing of the eldest son and also the sole survivor of that tragic massacre. And to make it even more disturbing, it is said that the boy was only 10 years old when he committed such a horrific act. And according to the villagers, that boy isn't really a boy at all, but a demon walking around in human skin. And with all that, it brings us back to the present, where a bunch of people could be seen slowly gathering outside the house of the family to witness the sight with their own eyes. And within that crowd, a lone figure could be seen staring at the head of the creature in a mix of disbelief and curiosity. As for this person's identity, this here is a demon hunter by the name of Mongrian, who after many years of slaughtering demons, was actually speechless seeing the state that head was in. And around him were the villagers who had called him to this place to get rid of the boy responsible for bringing this evil to their village. After hearing the whole story, the person himself was convinced this was not the doing of a human, because even a dozen adults working together would struggle to take down such a massive creature, let alone a 10-year-old child who went after such monstrosity all alone. And that got him wondering just what could be waiting for them on the other side of this door. And he soon got his answer as his gaze fell upon the sight before him. A child, battered and bruised, covered in blood, and around him the graves of the victims of that night, which this child had to bury with his own hands. Still, instead of jumping the gun, Mongolia decided to introduce himself to the child first, to verify the villagers' claims. But he heard no answer from the boy. Instead, he was met with those lifeless eyes that felt as though they were staring right into his soul. But that alone was no reason to conclude this child was a demon. Plus, he was sure this kid must have been starving for days, and from the looks of things, he had already given up on life and was planning on ending himself right next to these graves. So he offered him something to eat. This sudden gesture of kindness surprised the boy, because everyone before him had treated him like a demon ever since he was a child. Plus, he was sure the man had been sent here to eliminate him. So why was he being nice to him? Those words made the man pause because he didn't know how to answer the kid. So instead, he decided to sit down with the boy and hear his side of the story and what really happened that day. And it wasn't a pretty tale. It was a massacre. In the dead of night, that thing suddenly appeared out of nowhere when no one was prepared. As for him, he was so terrified by the creature and the sight that he hid the whole time, watching from the wardrobe as that creature devoured the bodies of all his loved ones. And at that time, as all that was happening, something within him started to change. And before he knew it, he was standing in a forest with a bamboo spear in his hand. And before him, the towering demon, drawing its last breaths as that thing pierced right through its neck. So basically what happened was that after managing to survive by hiding inside that wardrobe, he sold his family's belongings to find as much information about that creature as possible, including its weakness. Then he went out to hunt that monster, all at the age of just 10. And after hearing all that, the man was curious to know the reason for displaying its head at the front gate of the mansion. Well, it was because that demon ate the heads of all his family members, so he wanted to repay the creature in kind. Although that story was hard to believe, those eyes weren't of a liar. Still, despite knowing the weakness of that creature, successfully taking it out isn't an easy feat, even for a fully grown man. But what truly set this child apart was his sheer, unbreakable resolve. Even after witnessing firsthand the terrifying power that creature possessed, he faced it instead of trembling in fear. He found the strength to uncover its weakness, seize the opportunity, and bring down a foe far beyond his own strength. But above all else, what truly mattered was his will to act, to stare fear in the face, trust his own judgment, and do what needed to be done when anyone else would have frozen. But from the look in his eyes, it seemed like Mongrian was already too late, because the child showed no interest in living anymore. And with his revenge finally fulfilled, he just wanted to quietly die right next to his family. As he said those words, he suddenly got flicked on the forehead for thinking something so stupid, after which the man got up and began walking towards the exit while asking for the child's name, which was Yisi, meaning changing the world, something the man found quite fitting for someone like him. But he did have one last question for the child. Did he truly believe beheading that demon and putting its head on display was enough to satisfy his revenge? Or whether this was just his way of convincing himself it was over and his family could finally rest in peace? After all, he wasn't the only child who had lost his loved ones to demon kind, meaning he shouldn't feel satisfied just yet if he truly sought revenge. As for what the villagers claimed about him, he didn't believe it was true, so he was canceling this request and wished the kid farewell and hoped he would find peace in life and continue to live on, because that's what his family would have wanted for him. Cut to the outside, and the angry mob of villagers was seen berating the man for not doing his job. And since the man insisted the child was a human, they mistook it for greed and offered to pay him more money. But were stopped mid-sentence because after seeing their treatment of that child, he wanted to know the reason for hating a kid to such an extent that they wanted him dead. According to the skinny one, it was because of those creepy eyes of his. From the very beginning, they knew this day would come sooner or later, and if they didn't stop that monster now, he feared more misfortune would befall their village. Okay, that was enough bullshit out of his mouth. So the man asked him to stop because from everything he could see, they seemed like the real monsters here. The reason being, they were calling an innocent child a demon just because he was a bit different and hard to understand. So he suggested they stop it with their hatred if they didn't want it to come back and haunt them. Because in this world, hatred and resentment breeds evil karma, something that attracts demons. But seeing how they kept insisting he finished the job instead of listening to reason, he decided to show them the truth. And as soon as he took off his hat, all the villagers jumped back in shock. Because the man standing before them wasn't a man but a woman. And not just any woman, but a demoness. And she warned all of them never to lay a hand on that boy ever again, because if she found out otherwise, all of them would be answering to her. Terrified, the man tried running, but his legs gave out from the sheer fear as he called the woman a demon, but was corrected. She was a Daka bee, not a demon, and she had allied herself with humans to hunt her own kind, so they shouldn't be afraid of her. Still, it didn't matter to her whether they believed her or not. After all, she knew people like them all too well. Racist fools, and in their eyes, she was just another demon, so she wasn't planning on wasting her breath on them any further. As for the request she accepted, it was officially cancelled. But the bastard on the ground, after seeing that the person they hired was also a demon, was now fully convinced that child was a monster, which is why that woman was protecting him so much. And now that things had come to this point, they had no other choice. They can't rely on anyone anymore and would have to take matters into their own hands and deal with that demon child in their own way. Before long, the sun had set, and under the moonlit sky, that very same house was seen engulfed in flames as the fire began consuming it from every direction. And outside, the heartless and twisted villagers were laughing and celebrating over the suffering of a child who had already lost everything, as they took away the last thing that child had left. Cut to the inside, and Yais was seen desperately trying to put out the fire around the graves of his family members. But no matter how much he struggled or cried, it was no use. His tiny hands weren't capable of stopping the flames. Back with the real demons who, while celebrating seeing a child's despair, didn't even realize their own doom was beginning to unfold. As that woman's warning came true, all that hatred and resentment they had accumulated drew the attention of something toward the place, and all those emotions eventually merged together to take the form of something hideous. And those manifested emotions of hatred and malice forced their way straight into the mansion to take out the child. A sight the boy wasn't expecting, nor was he ready for. The creature, however, didn't care. It clenched its jaws and spat out a skull engulfed in purple flames toward the kid. But thankfully, he managed to move just in time and save himself from certain death. But the momentum sent him rolling through the burning house and he crashed into a nearby wall. Knowing it was no time to stay down, he quickly opened his eyes and found all the graves completely destroyed. Yeah, helpless, tired, and starving for days, but he wasn't the kind of person who would let something like this slide despite working with impossible odds. So he pushed himself back to his feet and decided to fight to the very end, instead of rolling over and accepting his fate. And seeing that it was the villagers responsible for bringing another evil to his doorstep, his blood began to boil. Because after taking his entire family from him, these people still weren't satisfied. And seeing their smiling faces, he finally realized what that demon hunter meant when she asked if he was truly satisfied with his revenge by taking out that one demon. And no, the answer was a no. So he swung that thing and ended the first guy. And he wasn't planning on stopping there. He needed to take down every single person responsible for drawing that demon to this village and causing the deaths of all his loved ones. So he charged forward, but despite his determination, their numbers were simply overwhelming, and he slowly began getting beaten down by the villagers. But then, as everything was slowly getting dark, those words rang in his head once again. The very question he himself had been avoiding. After losing his family, he had lost his will to live in the first place. So how could he be satisfied with just killing a single demon when there were countless more out there? And then his eyes landed on that demon's face, the creature who was smirking as it watched him suffer. And then boom, that very same axe came flying in and buried itself straight into the giant eyeball of the monster. As for the kid, he refused to die in this place because now he finally had another purpose in life, which was to exterminate every last one of these demon bastards from the face of the earth, and only then would his revenge be complete. But despite all that determination, his body was far too weak after days of starvation and it slowly began giving out. And just as it seemed like this was the end for him, another hand appeared and grabbed his arm, followed by a violent stomp on the ground, causing all those demonified villagers to turn into paste as chunks of their bodies went flying several meters through the air. This even surprised the demon, because someone this strong was the last person he was expecting to come across here. As for the woman, she took the child in her arms, and after seeing the kind of resolve he showed in the face of death and against impossible odds, she was truly impressed by the child's determination. As for the villagers, compared to this 10-year-old child, all of them were pathetic. For their hatred of an innocent child, they even resorted to giving up their humanity, becoming demons and sacrificing their very souls. Not just that, even the slug-faced demon that destroyed this child's life was drawn to this place because of their evil desires, because they couldn't stand to see a child's happiness. And now it was time to pay for their sins, and as a final piece of advice, she suggested they apologize to the boy's family in the afterlife. And bam, she flicked that finger, and the demon man got turned into paste. With all its minions dead, the creature became furious as it got ready to face the woman. Yeah, no, like a flash, she carved through the giant body of the monster and appeared back on the exact same spot as if she had never moved. After the demon was no more, she turned towards the child and showed surprise. How could someone so young have such unwavering resolve? Because she heard his words at that moment when most people would have already given up, that he still wanted to fight and exterminate the demons. And she just had one thing to say to that he chose well. Although the road ahead for him isn't going to be easy, she was sure that if he survived and managed to grow strong enough, good days would eventually come for him. As for her, she had also made her decision, which was to take the child in and help him grow stronger so he could finally exact his revenge. Story fast forwards who knows how long, and we are now in some other place. As for the kid, he seemed to be doing just fine, and was simply resting in the back. That's when he regained consciousness and slowly began opening his eyes to see where he was. That's when he spotted the same demon lady sitting outside of the room, who was showing relief after seeing him finally opening his eyes. The moment his eyes landed on her face, the memories of that time the demon barged into his place began flooding back to him. And he recalled how that thing destroyed all those graves belonging to his family, and almost took him out as well. But right now, he didn't feel any pain on his body despite being seriously injured in that battle. Not just that, even all those burn marks on his body had completely vanished. And it was all thanks to this woman who had been using her powers to heal him while he was unconscious, so he thanked the woman. As for her, she was showing surprise seeing how the child was acting so calm despite being in the presence of a dokabi. But to him it didn't matter. In fact, she had been taking care of him and had been so kind, so in his eyes she was more human than most people he met throughout his life. That answer amused the female, so she got straight to the point and made her offer to the kid, which was whether he would like to travel with her instead. She promised to give him a proper place to live and train him until he could stand on his own. But the boy was no fool, and after hearing such a tempting offer, he asked the woman for the catch. Once again, the boy managed to surprise her, because he was much sharper than she had expected. And yes, he was right. There indeed was a catch, which was that he would need to follow her to a land where no humans are allowed, the home of Dakabi, a place so overflowing with demonic energy that no normal human could survive there. Not just that, she wasn't planning on going easy on him just because he was a child. His training was going to be harsh, so much so that every day would feel like hell. And you know what? He seemed to like that idea. He wouldn't have it any other way, because without going through hell, he could never hope to achieve his dream of becoming a demon hunter. So he agreed to follow the woman as her disciple to the land of the Doka Bibi. Pleased with his answer, the woman got up to leave and asked the boy to finish up the soup because he would need to recover completely before they could go anywhere. And judging by how she was acting, it seemed less like she was taking in a disciple and more like she was planning on adopting the kid as her own son from the start. But to the boy, it made no difference. As long as he could grow strong enough to take his revenge, he didn't care what her intentions were. With that, the story cuts a couple of days, and both of them were seen making their way to their destination, and sure enough, the deeper they went into this territory, the thicker the demonic energy became. So the woman suggested he stick close to her, because if he got lost in these woods, he wouldn't ever be able to find his way back. Before they knew it, they arrived at the place, which was a massive gate leading into the land of the Dokabi, a place known as the Gwisu Temple, where no human was allowed to step foot in. Which is why the kid showed a bit of hesitation, and the woman teasingly asked whether he was starting to get scared after coming this far. But the kid clarified he wasn't scared. He was just worried about her since he didn't want her to get in trouble for bringing a human child with her to this place. Amused at how he was worried about her, she assured the kid not to worry, because beyond that door there is no dokaibi who would dare to talk back to the head. Surprised, he asked what she meant by head, but before he could get an answer, his gaze landed on the other side of that door, and he froze. Because that place was unlike anything he had seen his entire life. He pictured the land of the dokaibi to be dark, desolate, not a magnificent city with such beautiful architecture. And seeing him making that face, the woman asked whether he was surprised by the view. And obviously the answer was a yes. As for the people, the moment they noticed people standing at the entrance, they began gathering around the gate to see who it was. And to all their shock, they could smell the scent of a human coming from that place, and yeah, they weren't exactly happy with that. But not like they could do anything about it, because standing next to that human was their head, who made it clear to everyone that this child was with her, who came here to learn demon exorcism from their head. which makes this child a part of their family, so she suggested all of them treat him like one of their own. Well, at first none of them knew what to say to all that, but quickly all their concerns began to disappear. Since their head trusted that human boy, they had no objection to him living in this place. And that somewhat surprised him, because how amazing this woman had to be for all those people to accept him with just a few words from her mouth. As for her, she asked the kid to follow her, since they needed to start with his first step of training immediately, which was also the most important thing in demon hunting, which was, of course, to feed him every delicious dish imaginable in the city. And no, she wasn't planning on stopping at just that. There was a lot more space left on that table, so she asked the chef to bring as much meat as possible for the child. Surprised, the kid asked what exactly was she planning and what exactly did eating have to do with his demon hunting training. Yep, she's definitely thinking about adopting this kid as her own son, but on the outside she asked the boy not to think too much about it and focus on eating. After all, he was still a growing child, and his body needed proper nutrition for him to grow big and strong, which would help him a lot when facing off against demons in the future. Realizing the woman was right, he decided to just do as she was saying, and thanked the woman for saving his life and taking such good care of him. Yeah, she really didn't care about any of that. She just did this because she wanted to, and seeing the boy happy brought a smile to her face as well. That was when they heard another voice in the room calling for her, and it was a cheerful and energetic-looking young girl who brought in more meat for the kid. As for her name, this is Gong-ah. Seeing that it was her, Mongreon got ready to leave, since she had an important matter to tend to, so she was leaving him in her hands and instructed her to arrange a place for him to stay after he was done eating. And most importantly, she asked the girl to keep a close eye on him and make sure he cleans every single plate and doesn't leave behind even a single bite. And that scared the kid because this truly was starting to sound like hell. With her gone, the girl began bombarding the kid with questions like his age and stuff, and was left shocked after hearing he was only 10, yet seemed more mature than her who was 22 years old. As for the kid, he wasn't sure he should be more shocked about her reaction or the fact that she was 22, because she practically looked the same age as him. That's when another lady suddenly appeared with more food for him, explaining how humans age twice as fast as Dakabibi. So technically she was only a year older than him, and that made the girl's day, because that would mean she was like a big sister to him. Meanwhile, our boy, who was quietly watching the whole thing, didn't know what to make of any of this, because these Dokabi were nothing like what humans described them to be. Fast forward once more, and he was finally done and had managed to finish off all that food. And no, he wasn't exactly feeling too hot right now with his stomach on the verge of bursting, something Purple had found quite amusing, as she assured the kid not to worry, because he'll get used to it in no time. Still, she showed surprise that their head decided to take him in as her disciple, and was sure not many Dokabi were happy about that. So Yusa asked what made her think that. After all, what's so special about being a disciple of their head? Well, turns out he was severely underestimating that woman, because their head is a living legend who has been dealing with demons for over 300 years and is the strongest Dokabibi by far in this entire place. That last part surprised the kid, because he didn't expect that woman to be over 300 years old, and the fact that she managed to survive for so many years while fighting on the front lines meant she had to be extremely powerful. Still, after meeting her and the other Dokabi, they didn't seem any different than humans. If anything, around them he could feel a warmth that he never experienced back in his village, and that was a completely new feeling for him. As all that was going through his head, they heard a voice asking both of them to stop. Looking up, he saw a bunch of Dokabi blocking their path who didn't seem too pleased with him wandering around these streets like he belonged there. Plus, their head decided to take him in as her disciple, so they wanted to have a little chat with him. Yeah, now this was something he was completely used to, people always trying to pick on him because he was different. Next chapter, and two of the goons had Gongash restrained as she desperately tried breaking herself free. And in front of her was our hero, completely battered and bruised after the beating he took from the boy's hands. Seeing how the boy showed no signs of stopping, she warned him about the head and what she would say if she found out about this. But the kid was no fool himself. He knew that all too well, so he reminded the girl they were standing on the sparring ground, so basically what he had been doing for the past 30 minutes was sparring with this kid. Plus, he wanted to show him the difference in strength between humans and Dokabi, because he was worried he might get himself killed if he went after a real demon. So basically he was just doing him a favor. But yeah, in reality he was jealous, because at first he thought this kid was probably someone special, that even their head decided to take him in as her disciple. But after testing him, he was nothing special, just a talentless human who had gotten lucky once. As for our hero, after hearing the boy's words, he told him he didn't even realize this was a sparring session, so he apologized because he was mistaking this for simple bullying, so he didn't fight back. Yeah, turns out he really shouldn't have said that, because now that boy was seriously pissed. And then, boom, a punch landed squarely under his chin, followed by a relentless barrage of attacks as the boy continued to punish him for taking him for a fool. But then in the middle of pummeling the kid, he felt something off, because despite that kid getting absolutely destroyed, it didn't seem like he was afraid. And most importantly, he had faced off against countless opponents in the past, and none of them made him feel this way, because this kid wouldn't even close his eyes or flinch when getting hit. And then the kid moved, sidestepped, leaving everyone in shock as they saw him reeling that fist back to knock the fool's lights out. And next panel, the whole place froze completely. Not even a single movement from either one of them. As for that fist, he stopped it just inches away from his teeth. But just the sheer terror from that punch was enough for the fool to fall on his butt. Meanwhile, the kid, after experiencing firsthand the difference in strength between a human and a dokebi, muttered to himself he needed to listen to that woman and eat properly if he wanted to survive the training ahead. But first things first, he turned towards the fool before him and assured him he may look weak, but he was built sturdy as a rock and would love it if they continued these sparring sessions from now on. And not just that, he asked the kid not to hold back on those punches next time they meet, because a real demon won't show him any mercy. Story cuts a couple more hours and the moon was now high in the sky. And inside one of the buildings of the city, Mongolia was seen staring at something in a mix of confusion and worry. Yup, it was our hero, with his face completely swollen, staring at her with those puppy eyes. Well, turns out the news of him getting into a fight with Ilchui had already reached her. But our hero assured the woman they were simply sparring. But there was no fooling her. Still, they needed to take care of his injuries first, so she asked him to come closer so she could heal him. After a bit, she was done healing most of his injuries, and was pretty disappointed at that boy for treating him so harshly on his very first day. Still, since our boy was so insistent about calling it sparring, she agreed to look the other way, but also made it clear if those kids ever tried to go too far with him, he was to come to her immediately. As for their little so-called sparring session, she asked whether he tried fighting back, and the answer was a no, the reason being he didn't want to cause trouble for her since she was the one taking care of him. Apparently Mongolia didn't like that answer too much, and Yisi knew that too. But holding back her anger, she made it seem like she was just healing his swollen face with her powers. Yeah, no, Yisei may be a child, but he wasn't a fool and knew full well she wasn't pleased with that answer. So he asked the reason and was hit with a question. Did he remember how she had instructed all the Dokobin to treat him? And the answer was that she told them he was part of their family now. Exactly. So she suggested the boy stop acting as though he was allowed to live in this city out of charity. The boy promised he was going to keep that in mind. Still, the reason he didn't fight back at that moment wasn't just because he was holding back. It was because that boy was fighting seriously, meaning even if he wanted to fight back at that moment, his attacks wouldn't have reached him. Mongolia agreed with that assessment. After all, that boy was strong enough to take on most of the adults in sparring. Surprised, Yesei asked whether that boy had ever gone out to hunt demons, and the answer was a no, because if he did, he would surely die. She was expecting that reaction out of him, so she decided to explain her reasoning. After all, Yisu was nowhere near strong enough as that boy, yet he faced off against a low-grade demon and managed to take it down. And here she was claiming Ilchui wouldn't stand a chance if he ever found himself in a similar situation. It was because demon exercising arts don't purely rely on strength, and he was a perfect example of that. The only reason he was able to take down that beast was because he did his research about the monster, and used that knowledge to create a situation that favored him the most and was able to take that monster down. And that was something Ilchui was lacking. That boy has no patience nor the ability to think ahead, meaning if he goes after a demon without a plan, he would surely die, which was also the reason she chose him as her disciple that day. Because in order to survive in the world of demon hunters, one must possess both knowledge and martial prowess. And with the first lesson out of the way, she was giving him his first task before they could move on to his training for becoming a demon hunter. Cut to the next day, and our hero was in the middle of his training, which consisted of running for several hours until his legs completely gave out, doing push-ups until his arms felt like they were going to fall off. And the worst of them all, reading. Not sure if he was too sad about this last part though, but there was someone there who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else than sitting inside this library for hours, as she was slowly dying of boredom. So apparently a week had already passed since that day, and he had been so busy with training that she hardly got to see him, so she came to drag him out and play. But our hero apologized to the girl since he was already running out of time and needed to finish all these tasks as fast as possible if he wanted his real training to begin. And when asked what kind of task was given to him, the kid revealed he was instructed to read and memorize every single book inside of this library. Yeah, at first the girl wasn't able to believe her ears, and making that disgusted expression made it clear if Mongolian had given her that assignment, she would have bitten her own tongue to end herself. But our boy already liked reading, so he didn't really mind. Yeah, whatever. She didn't care about that nerdy stuff, but she was curious to know what was up with all those bruises all over his body. After all, he was told to read and train, so where did those come from? And was left surprised when she heard the boy explaining he wanted to impress Mongolia, so he was doing light sparring on a daily basis with Ilchui. Something even that kid found quite annoying because he was trying to avoid this freak as much as possible, but was being challenged every day. Yeah, none of them knew what to make of any of this because those two, despite acting all mature, were looking like complete idiots right now. Still, she was a bit worried about that boy. After all, there was no way a human has what it takes to defeat Ilchui, even when it comes to simple sparring. And our hero was aware of that fact, but despite that, he urged Ilchui not to go easy on him just because he was a human. And that was something Ilchui seriously hated about this kid, because even knowing the difference in strength between them, he still insisted on making him fight with everything he had. And having had enough of his persistence, he warned the kid never to approach him again, otherwise he would make sure to break every single bone in his body. And knowing that kid wasn't joking, Purple Head ran over to stop both of them before things got out of hand. And that gave Ilchui an opportunity to mock the kid for hiding behind a girl. But Yesei was far too stubborn to back down after coming so far, so he called out to the kid and made it clear he didn't mind a few broken bones, which is why he was looking forward to their next sparring session. To that, Ilchui had nothing left to say, so he quietly turned around to leave while thinking to himself how insufferable this human kid was. Cut to the next day, and it happened again. He heard that same annoying voice calling his name, and it was the same thing. He wanted to spar. And the outcome was always the same. Ilchui beating the hell out of him without even taking a single hit. And then again, the same thing happened. It was a completely one-sided beatdown. But despite that boy not possessing any talent for martial arts or the strength of a Dakabi, he kept going and didn't show any signs of giving up. And to make it worse, those eyes of his looked like they were looking past him, as if he was looking beyond him at something far more important. And that was something really getting on his nerves. And he wasn't planning on just sitting around and letting that boy outshine him. And there were two reasons for that, the first one being Gonga's smile, and the second was the recognition from the head, something he never wanted to lose to the likes of him. Which is why he swore to himself that he was going to train twice as hard as that boy, until the head finally recognized his talent and acknowledged him. And just like that, the seasons changed, and time kept moving forward. And before long, 1 whole year had passed since Yusei was brought to this place by Mongorio. And in this time, a lot had changed, because now things were completely different, as Ye was seen standing on both feet on the sparring ground with Ilchui staring at him with disbelief. Same thing for the rest of them. None of them had the words to describe what they were seeing, because this human's fists finally managed to reach a Doka baby. Next chapter, and Ilchui was trying to pull himself back to his feet, refusing to believe Yusei had actually landed a hit on him and insisting the whole thing was nothing more than a lucky shot. And burning with rage, he lunged at the kid to break his face in for making him look like a fool in front of his friends. But as his fist was about to connect, the kid moved, and in that very same instant he closed the distance between them. But thanks to his speed, Ilchui was able to move back to get away from his striking distance. Still, the boy seemed just as fast, and that made zero sense to him. After all, how can a human surpass a Dakabi with just 1 year of training? As for our hero, he himself was pretty amazed with his development, and finally understood why Mongolia told him to work on both his knowledge and martial prowess. It was because there was no way he would have been able to face Ilchui in such a one-sided matchup using just brute strength. A human's physical strength is limited, so in order to overcome this limit, a person has to rely on their knowledge and skills. So he did exactly that and kept moving to create openings for himself to strike back. And to make it worse for Ilchui, the kid was targeting all of his vital points, making it harder and harder for him to move his body properly. And that reminded him of the day 1 year ago, the first time he ever felt scared inside of a ring, and that small moment of hesitation gave our hero the opening he needed. So to seize it, he balled up a fist, did that classic trick of slightly raising the middle knuckle for that extra bit of pain, and began hammering the shit out of the poor kid. And the kid was moving like IP Man, landing fists at lightning-fast speeds that even the reflexes of a Dokabe weren't able to keep up with. So to finish it off, he reeled back his right hand and decked the fool right under his chin, sending him flying through the air. Cut to the spectators. All of them were staring at the sight with their breaths held and buttholes clenched because they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Because this boy managed to achieve the impossible with only 1 year of training. And not just beat him, the whole fight was completely one-sided. After a while, both of them were seen walking around the city with the girl constantly bombarding him with praises and how amazing he was and stuff, which was kind of annoying for our boy. In the middle of all that, he spotted a crowd of people gathered in the distance, and upon looking closer, he noticed they seemed like they were preparing for something. So he walked up and called out to Mongolia, who was instructing those people about something. And obviously his first question was what was going on, and whether she was planning on heading out somewhere, and the answer was a yes. Turns out she would be away for several days. And when asked the reason, the woman explained this was something their tribe did every year. To maintain a good relationship with humans, she sends out their finest demon hunters into the human world to help them exterminate the demons terrorizing the villages, and in doing so, they assure those humans that Dokaibi are their allies and a safe race. Well, that's how they met in the first place. Back then, she was out there on the same exact mission when she found him. Well, enough of that, she wanted to know about his progress with the assignment she gave him. Yeah, Gonga had big news for her, but before she could get a chance to say anything, a hand appeared and wrapped itself around the kid's shoulders. Turning around, he found Ilchui telling the woman the whole story and how Yisi defeated him in a one-on-one duel this morning. That somewhat surprised the woman, but she already knew this kid was special, and Ilchui also agreed with that, because even he got inspired to work harder because of this kid. Yeah, no, both of them knew something was fishy here because there was no way someone like Ilchui would ever praise this kid without an ulterior motive. Well, turns out they were right. He wanted to be praised by the woman as well. So he put on that whole act and it worked. The woman praised the kid for becoming so mature, for acknowledging his younger brother. Yeah, that face he was making while getting his head patted was making Ganga cringe out of her skin. Well, that was enough of that. She needed to head out now, so she instructed all of them to behave while she was away. Just then, he noticed his green-headed friend getting all chummy with the kid, as if they were already friends, so he asked what was up with that. Apparently, he was right. Both of them had been secretly friends for half a year now, and the only reason he pretended like he didn't like the kid was because of him. But now that Yite had become one of them, he didn't need to pretend anymore. That pissed off Ilchui a lot because that kid managed to seduce their pure-hearted friend right under their noses. Well, whatever, he was planning on heading out to play, and since our boy was also part of their group now, he invited him as well. And of course, Ganga wasn't planning on being left behind, so she said she also wanted to come along but was told she can't, because today is strictly boys' day, so no girls allowed. Annoyed, she asked who made that rule and was told no one did. He was doing this just because he felt like it. Yeah, well, if that was the case, then she was also feeling like punching his teeth out. Cut to the night in some other part of town, and a broken lock could be seen hanging on one of the buildings, and on the inside, the place was packed to the brim with weapons of every kind. And yup, it was the troublemaker group who were planning something stupid, and our boy had a very bad feeling about it. So he asked the fools what all this was about and why they brought him into this place. Turns out he still hadn't given up on their little competition, which is why they were getting ready to head out and hunt a real demon to settle once and for all who the better fighter was. Obviously, our hero advised against it because of obvious reasons. Plus, he didn't care who was better at fighting between them, and most importantly, they weren't allowed to leave the temple, and even if they did, there was no guarantee they would come across a demon around the temple area. Well, he didn't need to worry about that last part because their adults who went out on patrol earlier were heard talking about hearing the cries of a newborn baby in the woods, which was most definitely a newly born demon, and since those newborn demons are still stupid, they are surely to wander near the temple grounds. Although it was a possibility, he still urged all of them not to do something stupid, since it was still dangerous. Plus, how can they be so certain they were dealing with a child ghost here? Because there are more than 10 types of demons that make sounds like that to attract their prey. Okay, now he was just acting all mature and high and mighty just because he read a few books. So Ilchui, deciding not to waste any more time on him, asked whether he was with them or not, and the answer was no because he didn't want to disobey the head's orders. Well, too bad because they weren't planning on changing their mind. They were going out there whether he was coming or not. Plus, he was sure the kid was just using the head's name as an excuse, but in reality, he was just too scared to face a real demon. After a while, all three of them were seen walking around the forest in search of that demon baby. And surprisingly, they weren't the only ones there. In the end, our boy also came along, which somewhat surprised the rest of them. Seeing him acting so cautious, Ilchui mistook it for fear. So apparently the reason Ilchui has this weird superiority complex and thinks he is better than everyone else is because, as a child, he got a chance to see a demon with his own eyes, something no one else his age had ever done. And not just see one, the kid had even touched the thing. And this buffoon, who had absolutely no idea the kind of demons that human kid had faced at the age of just 10, was looking down on him and was planning on outshining him in front of his friends. As for our hero, he was too busy observing their every move to create as many escape routes for them as possible. After all, there was no guarantee the creature lurking in these woods was a newborn demon, because if the worst came to pass, then their chances of survival would be next to none. And turns out his suspicions were right on the money. The creature they were facing was indeed something else. A monster resembling a wild horse with the power to mimic the sounds of humans it devoured over the course of its lifespan. Next chapter, and they were still making their way deeper into the forest in search of that creature, but so far they hadn't found a single trace of it. And this was seriously starting to scare Ilchui, because the further away they got from the temple gate, the more unsettling the forest became. That's when he heard our hero's voice break the silence, scaring him senseless as he insisted all of them turn around, because he was getting a really bad feeling about this whole thing. And that pissed him off, because this kid was getting seriously full of himself thinking he could order him around just because he managed to beat him once in a sparring match. But our hero made it clear that wasn't the case. In fact, he knows for a fact he still was no match for him. The reason being, the only reason he was able to beat him that one time was because Ilchui let his guard down, and that gave him the opening to land a hit on him. And after sparring with him for about a year, he knows firsthand how incredible his physical abilities and technique are. Yeah, our hero showering him with compliments was exactly what this narcissist wanted to hear. And with his ego thoroughly satisfied, he even offered to let him join their squad as a permanent member. And that brought a smile to the kid's face because that would mean he was going to be like their younger brother. And that bright smile on his face took Ilchui by surprise. But before they could continue their conversation, they heard strange noises coming from a certain direction. And upon listening closer, they realized the sound resembled that of a crying infant. So the fool, instead of thinking things through, began running in that direction to get to the creature before everyone else. All because he was still hell-bent on showing off in front of our hero and proving just how strong he really was. And then, not even a few steps, and his eyes landed on the creature, and sure enough, it was the face of a child staring at him from the darkness. By then, the rest of them had also managed to catch up to him, and seeing the kid just standing there, asked what was going on. But as he saw the sight before him, even he froze in shock, because it was true, that demon had the face of a child. But the problem was there were several other faces alongside it, all glaring right at them. Lucky for them, our hero managed to reach them in time and shouted for them both to snap out of it and get away from that thing. But by then it was already too late, because the thing had already launched a bunch of spiky things from its back and shot those things straight at the boys, but thanks to our hero's shield, he was able to deflect the ones coming his way. But the same couldn't be said about the rest of them, although 2 of them managed to move just barely enough, thanks to our hero's warning to save their vitals. Greenhead, who still had no clue what was going on there, was caught completely by surprise. Back with our hero, who was seen flying through the air from the sheer force behind those spikes slamming into his shield. But thankfully he was still conscious, so he quickly got up to check on the rest of them. And his heart sank when he saw the condition the 3 of them were in. For the first 2, they had those spikes lodged into their shoulders and arms, but it wasn't bad enough to cause any fatal damage. They were still able to move, but Greenhead was a completely different story. Those things went straight through his torso, one of them tearing straight through his stomach. As for the creature, after realizing they wouldn't be able to run anymore, it slowly began revealing its true form and came out of the darkness to finish the job. And after seeing the real form of that monster, our boy realized that thing was a mid-ranked demon, which was far stronger and more dangerous compared to a low-level one, because against a low-level demon, a rookie demon hunter has a little bit chance of surviving. But when faced with something of that level, even that trained demon hunter's chances of a successful hunt were only 2 out of 10. And they didn't even fall under the category of rookie hunters yet, meaning their survival chances were practically non-existent if they faced that creature head-on. As for this creature's name, this thing is called the Wailing Dragon Demon, with risk level 6 and ranked at mid-grade. Although the chances were slim, this was no time to be panicking. He needed to find a way for all of them to survive this situation, and he somewhat had a plan, but he wasn't too thrilled about it. But he also knew he had no other choice at the moment, because if he didn't act fast, all of them were going to end up on the back of that monster, just like its previous victims. As he was trying to piece together a strategy, Iltree, the narcissistic idiot who caused all this, had already accepted his fate and was panicking, realizing he was going to die. Plus, seeing the state his friends were in, he was drowning in guilt, because all of this was his fault. If he had just listened to that kid and turned around when they had the chance, none of this would have happened. And all this guilt and panic was too much for him to handle, because no matter how he looked at it, there was no way he would be able to save anyone. And at that moment, the only thing he could think of was carrying Greenhead and running, hoping that thing wouldn't be able to catch them. But as soon as that thought crossed his mind, he heard a voice suggesting they leave Greenhead behind and use the chance to run. And surprisingly, the one who suggested that was our hero. But Iltree refused to even consider it, because there was no way he was leaving one of his friends behind to be turned into monster snack while they ran for their lives. But he was told to use his head instead of letting his emotions control him, because that boy was already a goner. His wounds were fatal, meaning even if they tried taking him back to the temple, he wouldn't survive, and would probably bleed out before they even reached the place. The answer was still a no. He wasn't abandoning his friend. By then, Yusei wasn't even listening to the fool, because this was about saving all their lives and sacrifices needed to be made. So he began explaining his plan, which also included that creature's weakness. And according to what he had read about that thing, these creatures go after prey that are filled with negative emotions, which was the reason it wasn't attacking them right now, because it was waiting for them to make a choice, whether they'll abandon their friend and run, or die here alongside him, and it wants them to run, because that would make Greenhead fall into despair. Same thing with them, they would get filled with negative emotions from guilt, making all 4 of them the perfect prey. But despite knowing that, they had no other choice. They needed to give that monster what it wanted, because that was the only way they stood a chance of surviving. Turning towards Greenhead, he heard the boy asking for help, but at the same time that creature was slowly closing in on them, and he realized what Yusei was saying might be the only chance they had of making it out alive. Meanwhile, our hero wasn't planning on waiting for his answer, so he tossed something towards the creature, and it landed right next to its feet, and then, boom, a massive explosion engulfed that part of the forest, which was actually a flashbang that momentarily blinded and disoriented the monster. And using the chance, our hero ran over to Greenhead and whispered something into his ear, along with an apology. And just like that, the place fell silent once more. Back with Greenhead, who was still a bit dazed from that blast and was trying to open his eyes to see what had just happened. And when he did, he found himself all alone, sitting on the ground with no sign of anyone else around. Cut to the rest of them who had used that chance to run and were seen rushing back to the temple to try and call for help. And Greenhead was somewhat glad they left, because this was for the best. He didn't want any of them to lose their lives because of him. As for what our hero whispered into his ear moments ago, it was a promise that he was going to avenge him, but he didn't care for that. All he wanted for him was to survive. That's all. But despite accepting his fate, the creature could still sense the negative emotions building up inside him, which meant he was now ripe for the taking. And so it did, and the sound of bone cracking filled the air as the creature clamped its jaws around his head. In the distance, our hero, who hadn't left with the other two, was witnessing the horrific sight in silence as that thing ended the boy's life with a single bite. As soon as it bit down on his head, something began forming on its back, and it slowly started taking the form of a human head, followed by a voice resembling Green Head, who was calling all of them cruel for leaving him behind and running off to save their own skins. And that sight of that creature using the voice of his kind-hearted friend to say all those cruel things about them seriously pissed our hero off, and he didn't even realize that he was actually breaking his own nails while clawing at that tree trunk. Cut back to the village where the entire place was in panic, people running around the streets and outskirts of the village. And all that commotion woke our purple head, who came out to check what was going on. That's when she found the old lady standing outside. So she asked what was all this panic about, and was told the boys had gone missing and no one was able to find them anywhere. That shocked the girl, so she asked the woman to clarify. Well, turns out they had scoured every inch of the village but weren't able to find them anywhere, so a search party was being sent out into the forest to look for them. Hearing those words made the girl recall the time those four ditched her to go out and play and realized why Ilchui didn't want to take her with them. And now all she could do was pray for them and hope all of them could make it back to the village in one piece. Cut to our hero, who was seen running through the forest to try and find his way back to the temple. But deep down, he was dying with guilt because of that judgment he made back there to sacrifice Green Head. Because even though he knew that what they did back there was the only reason all of them were still alive, he still couldn't forgive himself for it. Because he did something similar in the past as well. Back then, instead of rushing out to confront the monster, he hid himself and observed it till the very end, gathered as much information about it as possible, and used it to track down its lair and avenged his family. Which was the best decision he could make at that moment, and it worked. But despite knowing that, being forced to make that same choice once again brought back painful memories of that time, and it hurt like hell, and it made him hate himself for not being strong enough to protect the ones he cares about. But one thing that never changed about both times, he was forced to make this choice because of these demons, and his hatred against them grew even stronger because of that. That's when he heard a voice and got startled. Looking up, he found one of the soldiers from the village named Guichan, who showed relief that the boy was uninjured. Still, after the kind of chaos they caused in the village, he wasn't exactly pleased and asked where the other three fools were. But the kid had no answer to that question. After a moment of silence, he was heard telling the man the whole story, how they came across the wailing dragon demon, how Greenhead lost his life at that monster's hands. As for the other two, he had no idea where they were because they got separated during the whole chaos. And all that made the man furious, especially the part about Greenhead. And he was so furious that he prepared to head out immediately to hunt down that creature for what he did to their kids. So he asked the kid where that thing was and what it looked like. Our boy described the creature's appearance, but he wasn't too sure where that creature could be at the moment. Well, that was all he needed from the child, so he instructed him to head straight back to the temple while he went out to deal with that monster and find the other two boys. But our hero was more concerned about the fact that a seasoned demon hunter who was in charge of patrolling the outskirts of the temple had no clue what that demon looked like, and he wondered whether it was a good idea to let him go alone to face that creature because he knew nothing about it. So he suggested the man take him along, because that would increase their chances of taking down that monster if they worked together, but was reminded who he was, one of the top 5 in the village when it comes to brute strength. So he assured the kid to stop worrying about him and just do as he was being told. But not giving up, the kid insisted he take him with, but was turned down once again, because it was too dangerous. Our boy was aware of that, but the thing was, only he knew where that creature was last seen, so it would be faster if he took him along, because rescuing the other children was their top priority, and they couldn't afford to waste any more time. Realizing the kid was right, he reluctantly agreed, but on the condition that as soon as they came across that demon, he was to run immediately. Cut to some other place and the kids were seen pulling out those massive thorns from their bodies. And after running this far, they were sure that the creature wouldn't be able to track them down anymore. Still, the guilt of leaving behind their friend was eating away at him, because he was sure by now that creature had finished the job. Ilchui was well aware of that, and he was blaming all of this on our hero, because he used his words to convince them to run, and he was still sure if they had worked together, that monster wouldn't have stood a chance against them. But his friend wasn't too sure about that, because the only reason the two of them were still alive was thanks to Yusi. But Ilchui refused to listen to a single word about that because what they did was a disgrace, both as a demon hunter and as a dokabi. In the middle of speaking, the kid suddenly froze when he heard that same voice of the baby crying coming not far from him. And the fear hit him so hard that his legs literally locked up and refused to move. But gathering up his courage, he forced himself to turn around and look in the direction, and found a giant baby-looking monster standing right behind him. Turns out this was that very child ghost they came to this place to hunt. But but were instead intercepted by that horse demon. As for the demon, not sure why, but it didn't really look that demonic with that innocent smile on its face, as it showed excitement upon seeing other kids like itself. Next panel, boom, its head was seen being caved in with something massive. Well, it was Ilchui, who was so furious that he began taking out all his frustrations on that demon baby and continued bashing his club on its head, while screaming at the top of his lungs how he was going to do the same to that demon who took out their friend. At first, his friend didn't know what to say after seeing the brutality Ilchui was unleashing on the thing, but quickly his shock turned into rage as well, as he vowed he was going to do the same and avenge Greenhead by taking down that demon. Oh damn, both of them were so preoccupied with that demon baby that they didn't even sense the real danger that had already crept up behind them. And poof, in the blink of an eye, his voice completely vanished from the place, leaving behind a spray of red liquid splashing all over the place. Terrified, Ilchui turned around and found his lifeless body lying there right next to the horse demon, leaving Ilchui completely stunned, unable to process what he was seeing. But unlike their last encounter, there was something different this time about him. After losing everything, instead of freezing with horror, he clenched both hands around the metal club and prepared to face the demon and bash its head in, just as he did to that demon baby. But as he was about to take a step towards the monster, he froze as he found the monster teleporting right in front of his face with that massive jaw wide open. And at that moment, realizing just how powerless he truly was in front of these monsters, he accepted his fate and lowered the weapon. But just as the thing was about to clamp its jaw around his face, a miracle happened as he saw the giant monster getting pushed back with a kick to its face. After creating an opening for them, the man shouted for our hero to take that kid and run while he dealt with the demon. Our boy obeyed and got ready to do as he was being told. As for the monster, it was pissed beyond words for being interrupted in the middle of its hunt. Yeah, like the man cared. This bastard of a demon had taken down 2 of their kids, and there was no way in hell he was letting this thing walk out of this place with its life. So he began hammering the monster with those relentless strikes, literally burying the creature into the ground with each hit. And for the crime of trampling on the Gwisu temple's future, he was planning on making sure to give this creature a slow, agonizing death by breaking every bone in its body one by one, and making it suffer for every life it had taken. As for our hero, he was surprised to see a Dukkhabi fighting with his full power, because a monster of such high rank wasn't even able to do anything against him. Just then, he got snapped out of his thoughts as he heard the fool in his arms repeating over and over how he got all of them killed. But there was no time for his self-pity, and our hero had a hunch this fight was far from over, so he suggested the kid take the chance and head back to the village while he stays back to help Gwichon deal with that monster, which surprised the kid. After all, that creature stood no chance against the man. Well, that was true. In terms of physical strength, Gwichon was leagues ahead of that monster, but his master had taught him strength wasn't the only thing that mattered when it came to demon hunting. Because if Gwichon couldn't resist and fell victim to whatever the demon was still hiding, he'd need someone there to help him fight that monster. As for the man, he was just about ready to deliver the finishing blow, but just as his staff was about to bash the creature's brains out, the thing our hero had feared finally came to pass, as he saw the faces of both kids shooting out from the back of the monster, crying and asking why the man was trying to take them out. And then his worst fear came true, as he noticed the man's expression beginning to change as his eyes landed on those faces. And slowly he began falling for the trick and let his guard down, which gave the creature an opening, and it rammed straight into the guy's torso. But luckily he managed to save his vitals. And now, burning with rage that the thing was trying to use those kids' faces to mess with his head, he swung his staff, but then again he heard their voice reminding him of the time he promised them he was going to teach them how to use a staff. And this time that memory was too painful for him to ignore. And once again he stopped himself from hurting those kids. Deep down, Gwichon knew this was nothing but a trick of the demon. Those kids were already gone, and this was just an illusion he needed to crush alongside the demon. But his emotions made him lose sight of his objective and clouded his judgment, which was a weakness that all living beings with a heart cannot help but have. And the wailing dragon demon understood that fact all too well, because it was a weakness in its prey it had learned through countless hunts, which it used time over time to weaken its prey, until they lost all their will to fight. And not even once had it come across prey this trick didn't work on. That was until today, when something completely unexpected happened to it. Because mixed among its usual prey was something different, an anomalous being who didn't seem to possess the same weakness as its other victims. A boy who could see right through its tricks and see it for the demon it truly was. Something that completely defied the wailing dragon demon's common sense. Well, that's all for today, folks. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please give the video a thumbs up. And if you want to know what happens next, hit the subscribe button. Until next time, take care.